Okay, let's unpack this. You pride yourself on being well-informed,
Wow.
right? You're the kind of person who wants to go beyond the headlines.
Hmm.
So when you think about the massive infrastructure that literally forms the backbone of America, the railroads, the highways, those, towering bridges, the huge dams, who do you actually picture?
Yeah. Who comes to mind first?
Because if it's just sort of a parade of white male engineers and maybe a few top-hatted industrialists, well, you're missing a huge part of the story.
And honestly, maybe the most compelling part.
Exactly.
What's really fascinating is how that oversimplified version became the dominant narrative. We tend to celebrate the architects, the financiers.
Right.
And look, their vision was crucial, no doubt. But the sheer physical act of building it, that involved a much, much broader and more diverse group.
And their contributions are often just footnotes, if that.
If they're mentioned at all. Yeah.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we're not just, skimming the surface. We're diving headfirst into the historical accounts, the research that really illuminates the real story.
The story of who actually built America.
We're talking about the immigrant laborers, whose backs were breaking laying track, the women who stepped into roles they weren't supposed to, and the people of color who worked under the shadow of really intense discrimination.
Our mission here really is to unearth those indispensable roles.
And give you those aha moments, the ones that come from getting a richer, more truthful understanding of our history.
And I think if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Hmm.
understanding the diverse hands that physically built this nation,
Mm-hmm.
it gives you a much more nuanced foundation for understanding America itself today.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's tackle that myth head on. The prevailing narrative.
Right.
When we think about iconic American infrastructure, certain names, they just pop up, don't they? John Roebling.
The Brooklyn Bridge guy.
Yeah, him. Or Andrew Carnegie, the steel titan. Undeniably influential figures.
Oh, absolutely pivotal. In the planning, getting the resources, no question. But that singular focus, it tends to create what you could call a whitewashed history. The spotlight on them inadvertently just obscures the immense labor, the personal sacrifices made by countless others.
The people actually bringing these grand designs to life.
Exactly.
And let's be really clear, the building itself, this was backbreaking, often deadly work.
We're not talking about signing contracts in comfortable offices here.
No, we're talking extreme danger, punishing hours.
And often minimal reward for the people doing the really heavy lifting.
The extent of this historical overlooking is pretty stark, actually.
Yeah, there was a 2023 study, National Park Service. It found that only about 8% of historical markers in the U.S. commemorate non-white individuals or women.
Only 8%.
8%. That single statistic just dead. It hammers home how profoundly these stories have been pushed to the margin.
It's a staggering figure, isn't it? Okay, so let's start unpacking the contributions group by group, starting with the immigrant workers.
And what better example than the Transcontinental Railroad? A truly transformative project.
Absolutely. Finished 1869.
Right. Often celebrated, and rightly so, as this huge American achievement. But the workforce that built the western part, the Central Pacific Railroad,
Yeah.
overwhelmingly Chinese immigrants. Just imagine this. At its peak, something like 90% of their workforce.
90%? How many people is that?
Around 12,000 individuals,
Yeah.
roughly. Their labor often unseen, unacknowledged. That was the engine driving this huge national project.
12,000. I mean, just picture the scale of that. And it wasn't easy work laying track on flat ground.
Oh no, we're talking about blasting through the Sierra Nevada mountains with dynamite.
The danger there, it's almost unimaginable.
Precisely. They faced incredibly perilous conditions, brutal winters, treacherous mountains, rock slides, explosions,
Constant threat.
constant threat, and the workdays. Relentless, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
For how much pay?
About $1 a day, which, okay, had more buying power then, but it was still way less than white workers often got.
And on top of that,
Relentless racial discrimination. Forced to live in these squalid, unsanitary camps. It was grim.
and the human cost, just devastating.
Over 1,200 Chinese workers died during the construction. Avalanches, explosions, disease. It's truly a heartbreaking number.
And then the final insult, almost. The Golden Spike ceremony, the big photo op, joining East and West.
Their immense contributions were just virtually ignored, erased from the picture.
That lack of recognition at such a key moment really tells you something, doesn't it?
It really highlights the biases at play. And meanwhile, on the other side, building the Union Pacific from the east,
That was largely Irish immigrants, right?
Exactly. They formed a similarly crucial part of the workforce.
And they faced their own terrible conditions too. Scorching heat on the Great Plains.
And widespread anti-Irish prejudice. Bigotry was rampant.
Yeah.
But despite all that, the prejudice, the environment, they were instrumental. They laid over 1,900 miles of track.
1,900 miles. That's incredible.
Absolutely transformative for the economy, opening up the West.
Yeah.
So the scale of this immigrant contribution, under brutal conditions with little recognition, it really sets the stage for understanding how other groups, like women, also stepped up.
Okay, so we've covered the huge impact of immigrant labor, often in just horrific conditions. Let's shift focus now. Let's talk about the often unsung roles of women.
Right. And this is where Emily Warren Roebling's story is just so compelling. The Brooklyn Bridge.
Iconic. Construction starts 1869. Her father-in-law, John Roebling, is in charge.
But then he tragically dies. And her husband, Washington Roebling, who takes over, he gets this debilitating illness, caisson disease.
So Emily steps in.
Steps in is putting it mildly. For 11 years, she essentially ran that massive project.
11 years. Just think about that. A woman in the 19th century taking charge of maybe the biggest engineering project of its time.
It's extraordinary. She became the de facto chief engineer. She's managing suppliers, communicating with thousands of workers, and, remarkably, teaching herself complex engineering, cable tension, structural integrity, all of it. Basically a self-taught engineer in a completely male world.
So the bridge finally opens. 1883, huge success, marvel of engineering. Was she celebrated?
Not really. Not in any formal public way. Her crucial role was largely overlooked for decades.
Attributed to her husband.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Or just minimized. It's a powerful example of how gender bias just erased women's vital roles.
It truly is. And it wasn't just these huge, famous projects, right? Fast forward to World War II.
Ah, yes, the Rosie the Riveter era.
Women stepping into all kinds of traditionally male jobs, including infrastructure.
Absolutely. With so many men overseas, women were essential. Building highways, bridges, dams. The Alaska Highway in 42 is a fantastic example.
The Alkin Highway, yeah. Tell me about that.
Get this, 1,500 miles of vital road built in just 8 months.
8 months. Through that terrain, in those conditions.
Exactly. Harsh weather, rugged landscape. An incredible feat. And these women weren't just battling the elements in long hours.
They were battling prejudice, too.
Persistent societal prejudice about whether they could even do this kind of work. But their labor was indispensable to the war effort, to national connectivity.
Their resilience, their adaptability, it really showed what they were capable of.
Definitely. In fields they'd mostly been excluded from before.
Okay, so we've got immigrant workers, we've got women defying expectations. Let's turn now to the vital yet often ignored roles played by people of color.
This is such a fundamentally important part of the story. And yeah, it often goes untold. African-American laborers were instrumental in building so much 20th century infrastructure.
Like the interstate highway system.
Exactly. That massive project in the 50s and 60s. Think about roads like I-95 up and down the East Coast. Their hands were directly involved in building those arteries.
And this is happening during the Jim Crow era. Deep segregation, systemic discrimination.
Precisely. They faced segregated facilities, blatant injustice, and they were often pushed into the most dangerous, physically demanding jobs.
And paid less for it.
Significantly less than white workers. But despite these huge obstacles, their labor was fundamental to creating that huge highway network we rely on.
Which is now, what, over 46,000 miles?
By 2023, yeah. It's a stark reminder, even while enduring injustice, they were actively shaping the nation's landscape.
And it wasn't only African Americans, right? Native Americans, too.
Yes, absolutely. Native American workers made crucial contributions, often on projects built on or near their ancestral lands. Their knowledge of the terrain was often invaluable.
You mentioned the Hoover Dam earlier. That's another huge example, isn't it?
It really is. Built in the 1930s, Native American workers, particularly from the Navajo and Hopi tribes, were employed as high scalers.
High scalers, that sounds incredibly dangerous.
Exceptionally dangerous. They would literally dangle from ropes hundreds of feet up the canyon walls.
Doing what?
Using jackhammers, explosives, clearing loose rock to prepare the dam site. It took immense skill, bravery, real understanding of the rock.
Wow. And I assume they weren't paid well for risking their lives like that.
Often paid less than white counterparts, despite the hazardous work. So the Hoover Dam, providing vital water and power to the Southwest. It stands as another testament to their often unacknowledged contributions.
So when we look across these groups, immigrants, women, people of color, What are the common challenges, the threads that run through their experiences?
Well, the most obvious ones are the treacherous, often deadly working conditions, combined with deeply entrenched discrimination.
Right.
For immigrant workers, like on the railroad, we talked about the squalid camps, inadequate resources, almost no medical care.
And the lower wages, sometimes just 60% of what white workers earn.
Exactly. Plus, they were excluded from labor protections. Think about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, just blatant systemic marginalization.
And for women, even someone like Emily Roebling.
Even when they were clearly leading, like Roebling with the Brooklyn Bridge, formal recognition, fair pay, often completely absent.
And during World War II, the Rosies.
They filled critical jobs, but often faced lower pay, harassment, and then after the war,
What?
huge pressure to just go back home.
Return to domestic roles.
Yeah, effectively erasing their wartime contributions from the main story.
And for people of color.
Tragically, it's interwoven with systemic racism, segregation. African-American workers routinely got the most dangerous, lowest-paying jobs, denied chances for skilled work, advancement,
And Native American contributions.
often simply overlooked, minimized, or actively erased from the official accounts, even when projects directly impacted their lands and lives.
It paints a really powerful, if sobering picture. Immense hardship, profound injustice, side by side with this incredible collective effort. But were there times, were there places where these different groups actually came together, showed solidarity despite everything?
Absolutely. Well, division was often the norm. There were instances of collaboration, even solidarity. These stories maybe aren't told as often, but they're there. The Hoover Dam project is a key example.
Built during the Depression, right? Jobs were scarce. Over 21,000 workers, you said. That's a huge mix of people for that time.
A truly monumental undertaking.
Mm.
And the conditions were brutal desert heat, over 120 degrees, incredibly dangerous work, over 100 deaths.
So who was working there?
You had a large number of immigrant laborers,
Yeah.
Mexican, Italian workers, facing their own discrimination, often doing the most hazardous jobs like tunneling.
Okay.
African-American workers were present, though sadly limited by discriminatory hiring. They worked as laborers, cooks, facing segregation, unequal pay.
And women?
Women played crucial support roles, nurses, cooks, administrative staff.
So you have this incredibly diverse mix, all focused on this one massive goal, even with all the inequalities swirling around them.
Precisely. And despite those inequalities, the Hoover Dam was finished ahead of schedule, under budget. It really stands as this powerful, tangible symbol.
Of what diverse groups can achieve together.
Even under difficult, often unjust circumstances, working towards a common transformative goal, bringing water and power to the Southwest.
That's a really powerful perspective. What about the Golden Gate Bridge, another icon?
Another compelling example, built from 33 to 37. Notoriously challenging conditions, strong currents, fog, the constant risk of falling.
Who built that?
Immigrant laborers, again, were crucial. Italian and Portuguese workers, especially, as skilled riveters, steel workers, cable spinners, literally piecing it together.
Decent wages for the time, but facing death daily.
Absolutely. And this project famously used groundbreaking safety measures like that safety net.
Ah, the Halfway to Hell Club, the guy saved by the net.
That's the one. 19 workers saved. Still, tragically, 11 died. But that was remarkably low for such a project then.
A testament to safety efforts and skill.
Exactly. Again, women in support roles, African-American workers often in dangerous labor positions. Its completion was a global
The
sensation
triumph of collaboration.
and a lasting symbol of shared effort and determination.
So looking back across all this, what's the enduring legacy of these often underrepresented groups?
Their legacy is truly foundational. I mean, immigrant workers literally laid the rails connecting the nation.
Yeah.
Women like Emily Roebling shattered expectations, proved their capabilities against huge odds. People of color built so much essential infrastructure we still use, often while fighting for basic rights. Their collective effort, their resilience against adversity, it just powerfully shows the strength of diversity and inclusion.
Even when those ideas weren't fully embraced by society at the time.
Exactly. And the fact that U.S. infrastructure supports, what, a $21 trillion economy today, that speaks directly to the lasting impact of their early labor.
It's astonishing, really, how much their contributions have been overlooked or just erased from the popular story. Why do you think that happened? What were the main reasons?
Well, it's several things working together. Traditional history often focused on the engineers, the industrialists, the powerful people.
Right, the great men.
Yeah. While the experiences and labor of the working classes, especially marginalized groups, were just deemed less important or weren't documented properly.
Like the Chinese workers being left out of the golden spike photo.
A perfect, stark example of active erasure. And then you have deep-seated systemic racism and sexism, just devaluing the skills, the contributions, the very humanity of people of color and women.
Can you give some more specific examples of that erasure?
Sure, for the Chinese railroad workers, there was just a prolonged lack of detailed records about their lives, their work, their sacrifices. It's only relatively recent research that's painstakingly uncovering their stories.
And Emily Roebling.
Despite her undeniable role with the Brooklyn Bridge, formal recognition was often absent. Her achievements got credited to her husband, or just downplayed.
And African-American workers on projects like Hoover Dam.
Faced brutal segregation, unequal pay, and then had their contributions minimized or omitted in official reports and histories.
And Native Americans.
Their contributions, their very presence, often culturally erased from the dominant story, even when projects were on their lands. That 2023 National Trust report, less than 5% of historic sites focusing on non-white or female contributions. That just starkly shows the scale of this.
It really is sobering. It highlights how much work is still needed. But you mentioned there are ongoing efforts to correct this.
Yes, thankfully. There's a growing awareness, a collective effort to acknowledge and fix these historical gaps. The Chinese Railroad Workers Memorial in Utah in 2019, that was a significant, long overdue step.
That's good to hear.
And the growing recognition for Emily Roebling plaques, exhibits, new scholarship that's also positive, important. But, we still have a long way to go for a truly inclusive understanding of who built this nation.
So when we really think about infrastructure, it's so much more than just concrete and steel, isn't it? It's a symbol.
Absolutely. In its truest sense, infrastructure is national unity, resilience, made tangible. The Transcontinental Railroad literally stitched the country together.
Fostering connections that still matter.
Exactly. And icons like Hoover Dam, the Golden Gate Bridge, they became symbols of ingenuity, collective ambition, the power of diverse people collaborating.
And this history connects directly to today's challenges, doesn't it? Our infrastructure is aging.
It does. The ASCE gave U.S. infrastructure that C rating in 2021. That highlights the urgent need for modernization, for investment.
And the principles we've been talking about, diversity, inclusion, collaboration, they're just as relevant now.
Maybe even more so for the infrastructure projects of the 21st century.
Especially with big initiatives like the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Billions of dollars, millions of jobs.
Precisely. The Department of Transportation aims for, 2 million jobs by 2025? There's a real opportunity there to prioritize hiring from historically underrepresented communities.
Which is address inequities.
And also directly echo and honor the diverse workforce that laid the foundations in the first place.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the core message you hope people take away?
I think the most crucial takeaway is that building America's infrastructure was profoundly diverse, deeply collaborative. It wasn't just a few famous names.
It was the culmination of tireless labor.
Immense sacrifices, unwavering resilience from countless immigrant workers, women defying constraints, people of color persevering through discrimination. These often unacknowledged people played absolutely indispensable roles.
And truly acknowledging these true builders gives us a much more accurate, more complete, and ultimately more meaningful understanding of American history.
It really does. It honors the legacy of everyone who contributed.
Right.
And maybe it leaves you, our listener, with a question to think about. How does this more nuanced, more inclusive understanding of our past, how does that shape how we see, how we value the diverse workforce building and maintaining our infrastructure today?
That's a really important question to reflect on, something to explore further.